When AMD announced two different graphics cards over at Gamescom 2023, did anyone else think the same thing? Which is, why does the 7700 XT exist? I mean, it's $49 cheaper than the 7800 XT. I just don't understand why they'd release two different GPUs with such a similar price point. If we were talking like $149 versus $200, then yes, that would make sense. But realistically, if you're the sort of person that does have deep enough pockets to be able to buy one of these in the first place, that extra $50 surely is attainable, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, you would absolutely be forgiven for wanting to save yourself some money and either putting that towards your gaming PC or saving it for more of a rainy day. But I'm going to jump the gun on a little bit here and sort of express to you that this card has 4GB less VRAM than the 7800 XT, the memory speed itself is also slightly slower, and performance we're expecting to see actually quite a big difference between this and the 7800 XT. So this video is going to answer why this thing exists, why AMD is essentially selling it now, and obviously we will be walking you through the performance numbers, thermals, gameplay, everything, as well as an unboxing and review of this card itself, the Power Color Hellhound, to essentially help your buying decision. And if you are considering the 7700 XT, we'll probably be showing you why you should be looking at something else, unless you're watching this a little bit later down the line when pricing on this thing has changed. Got that? Makes sense? Wondering why my voice is all over the place? Well, me too. But let's get this thing unboxed and play some games right after a short word from this video's sponsor.
Corsair's K70 Max is a game changer for mechanical keyboards. Forget about what color switch to go for. Corsair's new MGX switches lets you customize the actuation point of your keyboard. Want a super soft touch for fast reactions? Or do you prefer more force to stop mistakes? Ultimately, the choice is all down to you. Learn more about the K70 Max today with the link down below.
Right then, let's jump straight into it by actually putting this under our overhead, take it out of the box, and have a look at what is on offer. Always excited to test a new GPU that I haven't seen before, and here it is, the Power Color 7700 XT Hellhound. I mean, this is actually a pretty nice feeling GPU. It's all metal. I mean, maybe that means it is going to be slightly more expensive than some of the competition. I will stress as well that when it comes to GPU pricing, a lot of the reviews are going to focus on RRP, but as we know, pricing is quite literally all over the place. Sometimes they are quite a lot more expensive, you get a better SKU, but then other times you get ones that maybe aren't so popular, are smaller, maybe only have two fans, use more plastics, and obviously the prices of those do start to come down quite a lot. And this is definitely the sort of GPU that I wouldn't want to spend loads of money on because of course it is so close to the 7800 XT in terms of RRP anyway, that in order for this to make any sense at all, you're going to have to be looking at a more value SKU. But assuming that you can get this for a good price, I think you will be happy with the overall build quality here. I mean, it's still two 8-pins as you'll find on the 7800 XT. We've also got this LED switch on the top here, which I quite like because it makes it easier to not have to rely on software. You've got this BIOS for overclock versus the silent mode. I don't really know anyone that uses the silent mode. Let me know in the comments below if you do use these things. Most people just tune it in software anyway. This is very much a triple fan design with, as I say, like a full metal backplate on it. And then you've got this pass-through design here as well. So it's not the most overbuilt solution in the world, but for a graphics card that's going to use around about 225 watts or so, it's probably about right, and I'm hoping it is going to be very quiet. But of course, as we do have a 7800 XT here as well, let's do a double unboxing. And here you can see what the 7800 XT reference design looks like, and I do not like this. That's not to say you should buy it, but I mean, look at it. It's offset, it's not symmetrical, it's upsetting my eyes. Why have they done this? I mean, it's quite clear that they've almost kept this from the bigger cards, but then got rid of a fan and just stuck it in the middle. I don't like that. I think it will look absolutely fine if it's in your rig like this, but vertical GPU, man, I do not like that at all. But yeah, this is definitely a lot smaller than our Power Color card. So if you are going for an ITX rig, obviously this would make a whole lot more sense. But if you are going to go for the quietest system possible, then I'd say grab something with 3 fans if you can, or at least get the best card that you can within your means. To complete the roundup, we will grab the NVIDIA RTX 4070. This is much smaller than all of these cards. I mean, it's not crazy amounts of difference actually between the AMD reference and NVIDIA's, but that is definitely a fair bit smaller. But once you put the third-party card, you can see that there is quite a lot of difference there. But yeah, those are the main physical differences between these 3 cards. Let me know which one is your favorite down in the comment section below, and ultimately, are you someone that would rather go for like the reference or the FE, or do you think going for something third-party has maybe a little bit more flair. But let's move right on, shall we, and see if we can get this in our rig. As we screw this in, I should also say that the minimum PSU recommendations of this is a 700 watt power supply. But if you want my personal opinion, I think this is probably a little bit of an overestimate because they know a lot of people are now buying crazy powerful i9 CPUs. But hey, buying a 750 watt supply for this does make sense anyway. Right, let's turn this on. Moment of truth. Yes, there we go. I mean, the Hellhound is always a card that's not really had any RGB lighting, it's just like blue. But personally speaking, I always think this looks quite nice. I mean, obviously if you're going for like an all red build, and no, you're gonna want to go for something else, but I do like the default blue lighting that you've got on here. I think it looks nice. This does also operate with the fans not spinning up unless they actively need to, which is nice. So if you're going to put it in like a display case like this O11 Evo, for instance, I think it is going to be a very attractive graphics card. Right then, sorry everyone for this to be so jarring, but quite literally everything that could go wrong, so it seems, has gone wrong since I started filming that last bit, which for me was 4 days ago, but for you was mere seconds. First thing that happened, the PC decided to not like the Windows install, and I couldn't fix it, I had to reinstall the lot. Then we ran out of time, but then much more importantly, my illness got worse and worse and worse and worse. I won't go into too many details, but we say it started here and ended a bit lower. But fear not, it's Monday now, I'm feeling better, I've got access to Starfield, everything is looking up, I've set up all the cameras, I start filming, we go through the Starfield performance, everything's looking good, and my microphone was off. And that one wasn't even plugged in as a backup. So we're going well. But anyway, you guys almost certainly would rather hear about Starfield and other game performance. So let's jump right in, and we'll start with Starfield. This is the settings menu, and I'll be honest, I don't like the fact that you don't get an option of quality presets when it comes to FSR. It's not actually a problem, it just makes benchmarking at few and doing comparisons that little bit harder. So we've currently got our render resolution scale set to 85%, and then the way we're upscaling it is with FSR 2. And then everything else is actually set to ultra across the board. And I do want to make it very clear that AMD has provided a review code for this. This is by no means sponsored by AMD whatsoever, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think this is an AMD optimized title, so I'm sure it's going to run very well on AMD hardware, especially bear in mind you can actually get a copy of Starfield free. Well, it's not really free, it's more included if you do decide to buy one of these GPUs or one of their fancy Ryzen CPUs. No spoilers, please! I haven't played Starfield yet, don't ruin the game! It's literally going to be right at the start. Relax. And of course, I would love to pretend that this was all new to me as well, right? But as I say, the recording previously failed, so we'll pretend, shall we, that I haven't seen this before. But to be fair, I'm not going to pretend that the performance of this is subpar, because it's really not, because what you're seeing here is actually the game running at 4K upscaled with FSR, and I think it is very, very impressive that you can get around about 50 frames a second from what is a mid-tier, apparently, 1440p GPU. I mean, this is what we want to see from the next generation, right? Obviously, this isn't going to apply in every game. This is literally right at the start. It's one scene. This does not mean that this is a 4K capable GPU, but especially at ultra settings, 4K, I think it is very impressive that it is able to run even the start of the game at this level of frame rate, especially bear in mind over on the console side of things, you are capped at 30 frames a second. So bear that in mind as we progress a little bit throughout the game. And to be fair, if you're using a controller and you're wanting to like use FreeSync and stuff, this is still going to be a much better than console level experience. But I won't lie, it's not the way I would want to play. It's great to have all of the visuals. I mean, it looks absolutely fantastic down here, but I would wager that there are going to be much more heavily intense scenes in this game where you will want a little bit more horsepower. So turning down the settings, but more likely playing this at 1440p is going to be your best bet. But I hope you agree, it is very interesting to see this game running at such a high frame rate on, as I say, what is officially a mid-tier GPU, though I don't think spending £400 on anything really should be considered mid-tier. So let's go right ahead and turn this down to 1440p, which unfortunately does mean running it in a window. Doesn't matter to you, does make it a bit sad for me. Then fundamentally, we will keep our FSR rendering resolution at 85%, and then you can notice the difference. And suddenly, we're getting a much, much higher frame rate. And this is the way you're gonna wanna play the game, around about 85 to 90 frames a second. It gives you a lot more wiggle room as well. I mean, I dare say if you're in certain space scenes, you're gonna get even higher than this, because there's not really that much to render. versus anything with a lot of high density modeling and stuff. That is where your frame rate is going to start to drop quite dramatically. But at the moment, we're getting around about 92 frames a second. Our GPU is being 100% utilized, so we're not anywhere near the bottleneck or anything, which is quite nice. This is actually a Ryzen 7900X, so it's pretty high end. It's not the absolute best of the best. You can go a little bit higher, but obviously for this GPU, in this game, we're not seeing any bottlenecking, which is pretty darn tasty. And how are we doing for temperatures actually? Around about 61 degrees with the hotspot being 83, so nothing really to worry about. I'll put the side panel on in just a second, but here's your noise test. Which honestly is very, very good. You can definitely hear it, but it's a low tone, it's very consistent, it's not annoying. But as soon as you put on that side panel, you're not really gonna hear it, despite the fact that the temperatures will of course increase slightly as you're restricting the airflow a little bit. Maybe not in this case, because we've got so many fans. Before I forget, let's actually put our side panel on. And then everything you're seeing from now on will be side panel on. And then we can move into our second game. And this was originally a PlayStation. You guys know by now it's one of my absolute favorites. This is Returnal, and I almost want to do a bit of a ray tracing test here. This is currently running at 4K epic without any ray tracing at around about 50 frames a second. It's definitely playable with a controller especially, but I would definitely recommend turning down some of the settings, more likely turning down the resolution. This actually isn't running FSR or DLSS or anything like that. I think my game, for some reason, even synced to the cloud is still completely bugged, so do take this with a little bit of pinch of salt, because you can of course use FSR, but the test I want to do is ray tracing. Let's see what we can do. I would say anything 60 FPS or above is playable and is how I would choose to play the game. So let's see what we can do. Ray traced reflections, low. Ray traced shadows, low. Is this gonna stay above 60? Yes, there you go. See, we have some ray tracing and it works around about 70 FPS or so, which is pretty nice. I imagine that this will change when a lot of stuff is going on screen quite a lot of the time, which is pretty frequent actually in Returnal. So let's see, let's put this to the test properly. Yeah, there you go. You can see we're getting a little bit of dipping now, around about 60 FPS on the low for now. I imagine there'll be sequences where it gets even lower as well. There you go, a little bit of stutter here and there. I do find that this is another one of those titles that just does run better on the NVIDIA side of things, but whether that is because of the ray tracing or not, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, yes, okay, things didn't go very well there, but you can still see there was that horrible stutter. And as someone that has played this game all the way through on an NVIDIA card, granted it was a 4090, I didn't ever get that level of stutter that you can see on the frame rate spiking here. So that is a little bit annoying, and that is still going to be a potential issue if you do want to go for an AMD card. Just be aware the ray tracing isn't as good as it is on the NVIDIA side of things. I mean, to be fair, if it's on an AMD optimized title, the ray tracing does tend to work a lot better. Make of that what you will. Let's move on though, shall we, to our multiplayer titles, and we're going to kick things off, perfect timing there, with some Halo Infinite. This is running at 4K Ultra, no ray tracing. So once again, as we say every video, 4K isn't realistic for multiplayer, but it does give you a good comparison with the next generation, or definitely current generation consoles. And to be fair, while the tone of this video is very much that this card should be a little bit cheaper, you still can't really argue with the overall performance, because I mean around about 60 FPS in a game like Halo at 4K resolution is very, very good, and this was without running any dynamic scaling or anything like that. So it does show you that the performance that this card does have is very, very good. And if this card ages like a lot of AMD graphics cards do, which is to actually get a fair bit more performance over time with graphics driver updates, but much more importantly, this graphics card actually drops down in price, then I can see this representing fantastic value for money, because fundamentally, from what we've seen so far, this is a graphics card that does actually have all of the performance that you guys need. But of course, as time goes on and games do get more and more intense, it's always nice to have a little bit more in the bank. But how about we turn this down to 1440p and change the quality preset to high to, I guess, more replicate what people will actually be using this graphics card for when it comes to multiplayer. And as you can see, the frame rate will increase quite dramatically. It's not as much as you see in some other games, interestingly enough, but you're still getting around about 100, 110 FPS. So this is going to be super slick, super smooth, especially on a monitor like this that is 144 Hertz. And overall, I think this is going to give you a fantastic way better than console level experience, but ultimately it gives you that flexibility of choosing the resolution and refresh rate that you actively want. It just would be nice if we were to see some active scaling technologies and things built into this game. I mean, you do actually have the baked-in minimum frame rate that does work quite well, but it'd be nice to see FSR or something similar properly embedded into the game. Although we do have a little bit of negative news, I'm afraid, and that is that the power color GPU that we have here is starting to make a little bit more noise than I'd like. This is a bit of a torture chamber in here. It is very hot. Let's check the thermostat. It's actually 29.5 degrees in here. We've got all the studio lights and things on. And yeah, it's not going to be the most optimal for thermals, but we're currently hitting around about 62 degrees on the GPU, 84 on the hotspots, and no real issue there. But the default fan profile, I'd say, is a little bit too aggressive because this sounds a bit loud, if you ask me. But yeah, there's plenty of tuning room. I would just make this run at like 75 degrees personally and have lower noise, but obviously it's all entirely up to you. But of course, I am well aware that there are plenty of people that don't play Halo. They don't get on with it, and instead they play a little alternative called Warzone. And what you're seeing here is running at 4K with FSR set to quality, and we're running this at the extreme preset. And I've got to admit, while the performance of this card when it comes to value might not necessarily be the best, but more on that a little bit later, I don't think too many people are going to be unimpressed with the performance, because you think this is 4K and you are still able to get close to 100 frames a second. I mean, this is something where AMD seems to really excel, actually, is in Call of Duty Warzone, because this is running remarkably well. It's very smooth, it's very nice to play, and of course it's a multiplayer title. Yes, we know 1440p is going to be the resolution most people will be playing at, but it's still very cool to see this running flat out and it doing so well. AMD does a very, very good job in this department. But let's turn this down to 1440p, and as you can see, the frame rate has definitely increased. I mean, it's quite easy maths. We had about 100 before, so we're getting probably about a 45 to 50% performance increase on average. It's not doing much to help my awareness, unfortunately, but it's still showing you that, yeah, this is going to be a very, very good GPU if you do want to play Call of Duty Warzone, which is nice. But I think it's now time to get a bit more technical. I want to see the hard numbers, graphs, Excel, and unfortunately, I'm not the man to do it. And for the first time ever in PC-centric history, Benchmarkus isn't either. Let's hand you over to the one, the only, Bench Carl. What? Oh no.
Hello everybody, this is Bench Carl, 100% not the same person as Editor Carl. Let's jump in. Let's start things off with the 4K numbers, and if we take a closer look at the 7700 XT, you can see we're actually seeing a big increase in performance compared to the last generation 6700 XT and 6750 XT. But we're seeing very similar performance to that of the RX 6800. This is both a good and bad thing. It's nice to see an improvement, but when the RX 6800 has 16GB of VRAM and is available for about the same price, it makes the 7700 XT a very difficult card to recommend, and on average at 4K, we're about just 2 FPS faster than the nearly 3-year-old GPU. And for just £50 or dollars extra, you can step up to the 7800 XT and enjoy a nearly 20% performance bump at 4K in the 5 games we tested. Taking a look at cost per frame, we can see there's a lot of cards very close to each other, but the £499 RX 7800 XT blows them out of the water. Usually the best cost per frame cards are the absolute cheapest. The 7700 XT meanwhile comes in at second place, but barely. And if we did see a price drop closer to that of the 6750 XT or 6700 XT's price, then the 7700 XT would be an absolute steal. While the 7700 XT is one of the best value at 4K, the 12GB of VRAM is likely to hamper it going forward at this resolution, which makes the RX 7800 XT or even RX 6800 more appealing with their 16GB of VRAM. Moving on to 1440p, we can start to see which cards really favour which games. The AMD GPUs perform way better in Warzone 2 and Hogwarts Legacy, while the Nvidia cards tend to perform better in Halo, Forza, and of course in Cyberpunk 2077. In the future, we'll hopefully add some more games to try and even the pack out a bit, but that's a job for future Carl. At 1440p, Cyberpunk with ray tracing sees a good performance increase compared to the last generation of AMD GPUs, but it's still miles off the Nvidia cards, even those without frame generation. As far as average performance goes, the 7700 XT looks to be close to the RTX 4070 and pulls a bit further ahead of the RX 6800. The 7800 XT takes a bigger lead over the 6800 XT, though we think that is mostly down to its big win in Warzone 2, favouring the newer AMD GPU here. If you have a look at Hogwarts Legacy, Forza and Cyberpunk, the 7800 XT is pretty much neck and neck with the 6800 XT, which is honestly a bit disappointing. The only positive thing for the 7800 XT versus the 6800 XT is the price, which we can see helps to make it a much better value product. Though if they just lowered the price of this 6800 XT to £479, it would be more or less the same thing. This is a confusing sequel by price rather than performance. Moving on to 1080p, and again we can see the Nvidia cards top the leaderboard in Halo, Forza and Cyberpunk. And at 1080p, this is where the newest generation of AMD GPUs makes less sense, as it's so much closer to the last generation. In Hogwarts Legacy, we seem to hit a CPU bottleneck, which seems to impact the Nvidia cards a lot more, as they all seem to be stuck around 115 to 120 FPS. We did quite a bit of retesting, as we were kind of confused here, especially when the 2080 Ti did so well. Maybe a 14th gen Intel CPU or a 7800X3D might help us spread these cards out a bit more and alleviate that bottleneck. On average, at 1080p, we can see the middle of the pack is a lot more condensed, as we're starting to see CPU bottlenecking. These cards will perform extremely well at 1080p, but their value doesn't make a lot of sense, as you'd need to pair it with a top-end CPU to really extract the most out of them and reduce that bottleneck. We'll quickly touch on power consumption, but it's what we would expect. The AMD cards aren't anywhere near as energy efficient as the Nvidia counterparts, but providing they offer much better value in the first place and a much lower price, it's a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. Overall, we think the 7700 XT is a great GPU. It's just priced too high. We'll likely see the price come down, like how the 7900 XT launched at $899 and is now about $750. So there's still hope for the 7700 XT to redeem itself. If you truly care about ray tracing and value that more than raw rasterization performance, then the 4070 is still your only option anywhere near this price point, though that is going to cost you a lot more at closer to £580.
Well then, ladies and gentlemen, there we are, the 7700 XT, a graphics card I really wanted to love because I thought it was going to be the card of the generation, but unfortunately the main problem with it is just that it's been overshadowed by the significantly better 7800 XT for a very similar price. And it's annoyed me in the past when reviewers have said, oh, if only this card was like $20, $30, $50 cheaper, it'd be really easy to recommend. But ultimately the 7700 XT is a perfect example of that, because when it's very similar performance to a 6800 and there's not really that much has changed, but more importantly you can get a lot more performance for a mere $40, $50 more, which especially if you're looking at like heavy aftermarket versions of the cards might even be the same price point. It just makes it very difficult to recommend, which is actually such a shame because the performance that you get this card is fantastic. And I think compared to most of the Nvidia options as well, this card really does stand out in that regard, and it is definitely worth going. But if you can get the 7800 XT, that is now, I think, the best card that you can buy, as far as I'm concerned. That's the one I would look at. Not obviously in terms of outright best performance, but when it comes to value, when it comes to the level of frame rate that you guys actually need, I think that is going to be the best card for most people. I mean, you've got more budget-friendly options as well. Those are the ones that need to come down. But I think right in the midpoint, to give people the high-end 1440, the low-end 4K performance, we've had a little bit of a gap for a while. And while I think more could have been done with the 7800 XT, obviously we want more performance all the time, I think based on the current options of what we've got, I personally am very happy with the 7800 XT, and I know that this card will come good a little bit later in its life cycle once the price point has reduced. But that's my opinion. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comment section below. What do you like about it? What do you dislike? Do you agree with me that the pricing's a little bit off, or are you picking one of these up day one? I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to absolutely smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and of course if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this rig, including the case, the GPU, maybe the RAM, you can find that linked down below with our Amazon affiliate links.
And while you're down there, why not bask in the glory of Corsair's K70 Max? This epic keyboard puts you in full control of the actuation force for complete customizability. You can even assign 2 different actions to each key press, one for a light tap, another for a heavy. The board also packs per key RGB lighting, super smooth media controls, and Axon processing for up to 8000 Hz of polling rate. Get your game on today with the link down below.
But thank you so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.